Welcome back to College 101 today. Continuing in the vein of career-related advice, we're going to be talking about resumes, and I've got a lot to unpack here, a lot of tips, and I can almost guarantee that at least one of these things will be new to you because I've reworked my resume so many different times, and every time I talk to people and have them look at it, there's something new to try, something new that I missed. So stick around for all the components and all the tips so you can make sure that you're doing everything as best as you can. So the purpose of your resume is to be a record of your accomplishments and an easy document for your future employer or interviewer to know what you've done, who you are, what you're interested in, and why they should hire you. As a college student, especially if you're like a sophomore or a freshman, you might not have a lot on your resume. Maybe you worked a fast food job in high school or other entry level service type position. Maybe you've taken a couple jobs in college or you're on a couple clubs, but it's not really all that fleshed out. Because of that, I'm going to start with some simple guidelines for what your resume should look like. The first thing is your resume should be no more than one page. You just simply don't have enough relevant and interesting experience to fill more than a page in most cases. The second thing is it needs to be visually pleasing and easy to read. What I mean by this is it needs to be simple and well organized. It needs to get the information across consistently and be in a format that they're used to. Because while you might say, I need to try and stand out, but if they can't find the information because it looks so different from what they're used to, it's going to hurt you more than it helps you for being memorable. The last thing I will say about your resume is do not lie on your resume ever. It will come out if they hire you, or even just in the interview. They're going to ask you a question about something. They're going to ask you about an experience when you work there. You're going to let it slip. So just don't lie on your resume. Don't make up experience. Don't make up stories, even if it's going to help you get the job, because it's not going to pay off in the long term. So I want to go section by section through the parts of a resume that you should have and sort of best practices. The first thing is that you need a header. And for this header, put it in the header of your Word document. What you need here is your name, your phone number, your email address at a minimum. You can also put things like a home address if you want, but nobody really uses those anymore. You can put a link to your LinkedIn profile. That would be a little more useful if you have a good LinkedIn profile. I am going to be making a video about LinkedIn profiles, so definitely check that out after you're done with this one. The second section that should be after that is typically going to be your education section. Again, especially if you don't have any relevant internship experience, this is the most important thing for them to know. Sure, you're going to tell them, but they're going to be searching for this. They're going to be putting you in some database if you're at a career fair. So having this information front and center is really important. For this, you need your chosen major, your expected graduation date, or your class standing, or both. And in most cases, you'll want to put your GPA. I will say here there is some debate. What I'll say is that almost every job is going to ask you about your GPA at some point. If it's a really high profile company, they'll want to know up front because they've got some cutoff like 3.0 or 3.25 or 3.4. And unfortunately, if you don't meet that, they're just going to cut you out. They've got too many applicants. So if your GPA is below a 3.0, I would say it's up to you whether or not you put it. If you put it, it does let employers know up front, but it might dismiss them. What I would recommend is don't put a GPA below 3.0 on your resume. And then when you talk to employers, target the ones you know that are not going to care about it as much. You don't want to waste your time or the interviewer's time and the other students' time who could be interviewing with that company if you know you're not going to qualify for their positions. For companies that don't have GPA restrictions, they're typically more understanding to hear your story. Maybe you had a family emergency, maybe you had a rough start to college. They'll understand where you're coming from. Maybe you had to work multiple jobs this semester. So you can tell them about your experience and frame it in a better light, and they'll be more likely to hire you than some of these big companies that will just cut you off because of your GPA. There are a few other things you can put under your education section if you want. You can put scholarships you've qualified for, especially if they're like departmental or school scholarships. You can also put the classes you've taken. Typically, they're already going to know what someone in your major takes. If you say, I'm a mechanical engineering student or a history student, they're going to know what classes you've taken, especially through your sophomore year. If you're a grad student or a senior who's taken some specialty courses, if say you're going to go work for a semiconductor company and you took a semiconductors class, or you want to go work for an economic research institute and you specialized in maybe a social economics class or something, you can put that kind of stuff on there and it would be helpful and make you stand out. You can also put extracurriculars here, especially if they're related to your major, but otherwise I would rather put them in a section below that we're going to talk about later, so stick around for that. The next section is the meat of your resume, and that's your experience section. I would put this all, if you're a freshman or a sophomore, in one section called experience or work experience. If you're a junior or a senior that has some internship experience, you can separate it into industry experience and other, relevant experience and other, or something like that, basically to differentiate between your college jobs, being a custodian or a waiter or whatever, and your industry jobs being a financial analyst, an editor, an engineering intern, or whatever it might have been. For each of these entries, you're going to need some basic information at the header of that entry. Your job title, the job location, the dates you worked there, and what company you worked for. That pretty well summarizes, and especially if it's something in the industry, they're going to have a decent idea of what that means for your experience. After that header section, what I would do is I would have 2 to 4 bullet points for each one. If you can't come up with at least 2 separate bullet points for a position, don't put it on your resume. There's not enough to talk about there. My personal philosophy is that each of these bullet points should only be 1 line long. They shouldn't have a return. I know there are other people who don't follow that philosophy, but that's what I think looks cleanest. If you can, start every single bullet point with an action word, something like organized, executed, completed, implemented, edited, wrote, whatever it might be, depending on what kind of work you had. These things show action and they make you seem more active, involved in it, and more impressive. With these action words and verbs, make sure they're all in the same tense as well. You want to make sure your resume is consistent. So if you say, I was doing this, and I did that, and I am doing this, all within the same job description from 2 years ago, it's super confusing. It's going to show that you didn't proofread your resume very well, and it's not going to reflect well on you, no matter how good that job experience was. The second piece of advice for writing a job description on your resume would be to include a number in every bullet point if you can, because if you can quantify results, that's a lot better. You could say, I completed a study for this program. Well, sure, that's impressive. You completed it, and they probably assume you started it. But if you can say, I completed a study of 7 different options, evaluating them on this X, Y, and Z criteria, and chose this one because of this to improve this by X%. Okay, maybe that was a lot of modifiers. But if you can use some of those factors, use a percent improvement, use a number of different things that you completed, include different concepts that you did to be specific, now they know what you actually did. And if you get to an interview, they can ask you an intelligent question instead of saying, so what'd you do when you worked at ABC Engineering? They can say, oh, I see you looked at, tensile strength, durability, flexibility, and repeated stresses on this design tool. How did you choose what was best? Or something like that. I'm not a mechanical engineer. You can tell because that was a struggle to come up with those jargons. And then the last thing about these is, again, don't lie, but be honest. And then when you get into an interview to talk about these things, brag as honestly as you can. Don't say, oh, well, like my mentor reviewed it, or oh, he kind of helped me. If you truly took a project and ran with it, own it and make yourself sound great because you deserve it and they want to know that you can take something and run with it. Because no matter what job you're interviewing for, internship, entry level, you're going to have someone watching over your shoulder. They know that. So just talk about the things you did and give yourself the credit. All right, break time. Why do they call it a resume? Because you use it when you want to resume employment. Sorry about that one. If you've liked this video or that pun, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you think that joke was just, really low quality, I'll admit that's kind of low-hanging fruit, then subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, and come let me know on every single video which puns you think are good and which ones are just, not hitting the mark. The next section on your resume after your experience that I would put is a skills section. If you can, prioritize hard skills like softwares you've learned. Maybe you say you're familiar with MLA and APA formats if you're in like a writing editing discipline. Maybe you can talk about academic databases you're familiar working in. And a lot of these will be things you might learn in your classes. The other things you can put under this section are soft skills. These are things like communication, leadership, teamwork, and they're really kind of fuzzy, and everyone's going to say that they have them. Make sure that you can back up these claims with a real experience. If you put on your resume that you have a skill in teamwork, make sure you have a specific experience where you can discuss why teamwork was a strength, maybe when you led a team or resolved issues on a team as a team member, or picked up the slack when another team member didn't do their part. Preferably, these things will be related back to your previous jobs on the internship, because then in an interview question, you can tie it all together and point them back and cycle them back through your resume so they're constantly reading and rereading the information to really cement your accomplishments and who you are in their mind. Those are the sections that I would call absolutely vital. There is one other section you could put, and I would say that's awards and organizations, clubs, hobbies, and things like that. So if you have scholarships and you didn't put them under education, you can put them here. If you're part of any clubs, especially clubs outside your major, where the things you do aren't necessarily a work experience, you can put them here as well as your role in them if you have a specific role. This is also a place if you're trying to fill a little bit of space, especially if you're like a freshman or a sophomore, you can put things down there about you that would be great conversation starters in an interview. Part of an interview, and I'm going to make a whole video about interview advice, is breaking the ice, and having something like that gives the interview something to cling on to, because otherwise that interviewer feels just as awkward as you do sitting in that room not knowing anything about you. A quick little story, this actually did kind of pay off for me in a little way. I went to go talk to a company. They're a really well-respected manufacturing company that's been in Utah for a while, and I put on there that I loved Ultimate Frisbee and I played on the BYU Ultimate Frisbee team. Turns out this recruiter had as well, like 8 years ago. And so we chatted about that for a little while. I didn't get an interview, I didn't go an intern with them, but we're connected on LinkedIn, and I actually went on a tour with him with his facility, with a club. So now that connection is made, and I can always reference back to that. So those are all the sections I would put on a resume. Lastly, I want to give you some general tips for putting together a resume. The first one is what's called the triangle rule. The gist of this rule is that interviewers only look at your resume for 1 to 5 seconds if you're at a career fair or if they're going through a big stack of them later. And so their eyes travel down the page from left to right. From left to right. And so the things that are on the top left corner are going to be the first thing they see. And at the top of the page, they might read all the way across. They're going to read your full name. They're going to read pretty much your whole education section. And then as you move further down your work experience and to your skills, they're not going to make it all the way across the line. They're not going to do all that reading. So the most important things stick higher up and further to the left. The second piece of advice, and I kind of talked about this up front, is don't try and do anything fancy with your resume unless you're in like an arts field. If you're a graphic designer and you give them a resume that's black and white, they might be kind of wondering why you're a graphic designer. But in most cases, a simple resume is best. This is important for humans to read and get information easily, but also a lot of online job applications are automatically filtered by robotic automated or applicant tracking systems, ATSs, and they scrub through your resume looking for keywords and other things like that. So if your resume is hard for a robot to process and get the meat out of, then you're never going to be selected for jobs online because the robot's just going to kick your application right out. The third tip I'll give you is to personalize your resume for jobs. Now, this shouldn't be something that takes you an hour or 2 hours for every resume. And so the way I would do this is I would create a 2-page resume as your template, put all your job experience, have 3 or 4 or 5 bullet points for each job experience, and really expand that out, especially once you're maybe a junior or a senior that has some work experience. And then when you go to apply for a job, delete different sections, delete bullet points, delete work experiences that aren't as relevant to get it down to 1 page, save a copy of that to send to the application, and leave your full template. This way, once you've written maybe your 2-page resume, it'll only take you 10 minutes or 5 minutes to tailor your resume to that job based on what kinds of things they're looking for. Resumes are something that you can spend as much or as little time as you want, but these tips should help you get all the most important points for a resume to be something that both humans and online systems are friendly to and familiar with, and will give you the best shot at making a great impression with your resume. If you like this content about careers, I'm going to be making a lot more of it. I'm really excited to share my experiences, and in fact, in the next video, I'm going to go through each of my resumes that I've used to get a job and step you through my thought process, where I was at in college when I used them. So please check that out in the next video. Thanks again for tuning in to College 101, and we'll see you next time.